Okay, hello. I think we're going. Good. Yeah, welcome to History Chats this afternoon. Got one coming up here in a couple minutes. If you're joining us live, as always, we're just gonna kind of leave the lobby open here for a little bit, let people join us. And if you're watching this after the fact, just feel free to skip ahead about 5 minutes. We're gonna be starting at 12:30, which is about 4 minutes from now. So, yeah. If you don't want to sit through the vamping and waiting for people to join, just skip right ahead. Just going to double check, make sure everything is looking okay. Good. All right. Hope you're all having a wonderful afternoon. We're going to be talking about, we're starting our new series this week for the month of September. I guess we're in October now. We're turning to people you should know. So that's what we're going to be doing, starting with Win Brockmeyer here. While I'm telling you about that, I guess, what's next week? There we go. Here's something coming up on Saturday, October 23rd, in a couple weeks here. We're going to be having a History Speaks lecture over the internet here, like we always do. And that'll be our guest speaker will be Paul Whitaker, talking about botany, apples, botany, and cider. So that'll be a great, very, very knowledgeable in that subject, and it'll be a great talk if you want to watch that. Again, live, that'll be at 2 p.m. on Saturday, on the 23rd. We're able to do that and all of these programs because of our sponsors. So big thanks to Yankee Bookstore and everybody who helps us do this with becoming a member or donating or what have you. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or to become a member or just want to say hello, feel free to come into the museum here in Wausau. Marathon County Historical Society is at the Woodson History Center. You can give us a call. You check our website, marathoncountyhistory.org. Yeah. Anyway, so big thanks to everybody who makes it possible for us to do this. Okay. I've already burned through everything I need to say here, so we're just going to kind of wait for a minute or so here. Okay, remember to put my phone on silent. You don't have to, but I probably shouldn't be distracted, so I'm going to do that real quick. Okay. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna jump in and start a little early here. I know there's a little bit of a delay. Hey, we're gonna get started. I think just again, little early here, but I think there's enough to get through here. So, hey, welcome. History Chats this week is talking about Win Brockmeyer, who was the winningest coach in football history, and certainly Wausau, Marathon County, and I doubt that anybody will ever equal the feat that he had in his career. He taught here at Wausau High School as a physical education, and he was the coach of the basketball team and the varsity for a little while, and then he did some other stuff. But of course, he's best known for being a football coach. When he retired in 1970, or the school year 71, but the last game he played was in 1970. He retired with a record here in Wausau of 230 wins, 33 losses, and 9 ties, which is a remarkable thing. That gives him a 0.874% win ratio, which is remarkable. Of his 33 years in coaching, he won 26 conference championships. Again, actually, to give you an idea of this, I graphed this out. This is the average from 1920 to 1980, so about 60 years. This is the average wins, losses, and ties by the Wausau High School football team. And this is average. So some games, some years they'd play for 7 7 games. Sometimes they play for 27. Conference, non-conference. I tried to include as many games as we could, and you can see it's pretty blue most of the time in the 20th century. Wausau won more than it lost, but it kind of puts it in perspective that this represents the period that when Brockmeyer was in charge. In particular, this bit over here, in which they went, I think, 8 years after they lost to Antigo in 1938. They then went 8 years without losing another game, which represents about 46 straight wins. There was 1 year where they completely shut out every team they played. Nobody scored a point. In fact, nobody got past their 25-yard line, which is remarkable for sure. So that's kind of his tenure. I think maybe before we get too deep into that, let's stop back and say, who is Win Brockmeyer? Well, Winfried Otto Brockmeyer was born in 1907 in Mankato, Minnesota. He played throughout his high school career. He was a lettered in track and field. He did in football and basketball. So he was a multi-athlete, and he did very well in all of them. Now, after high school, he goes on and plays for the University of Minnesota and becomes a star athlete there, on the football team especially. I think he played halfback. I'm not going to remember specifically. Certainly well known at that point in time. He captained the team in 1930 to a remarkable season. It was definitely a big, an interesting point in his career, and he was became a breakout star during this period. After he graduated in, I think, 1931, he started to teach. He got a job as a coach. As you can see from this picture, this is the very early days of football, back when it was a collegiate thing. That's, if you were at a university, you'd play football. You had to be the thing to go out for. You still had the leather caps and all that sort of stuff. It starts to become popular by the 1930s, though, to the point where it's filtering down, and you have teams that have been playing in high schools for many years, and there's a desire to make it a bigger part of, as a lot of the extracurriculars ended up becoming a bigger part of the focus. So he gets a job. He's teaching in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, for about a year, which is over there. And then he moves to Faribault, which is where he spends a good chunk of his time in the 1930s. Around this time, he is also playing in the semi-pro team, the Minnesota All-Stars. But he's also teaching. And apparently after, story goes that, he would come in late because he's trying to do both things at once, and was told, you got to pick one. And so he decides to, he likes coaching more than he does playing. He sees a future there, and he's very good at it, obviously. That's what he does. In 1937, after the school year is over, he entertains a job offer. So he comes to Wausau for an interview to maybe take over the team here. So this is the team that he would be taking over. The 1936, well, not Lumberjacks. They weren't known as the Lumberjacks at this point, but they were known as the Cardinals still. It's interesting because throughout the 1930s and 40s, they introduced the Lumberjacks, but then they don't really commit. In some years, they are interchangeably using the word Jacks and Cards for their football team. But anyway, at this point, this is the team. They are coached by Clyde Cabby Ewers, who takes over, and in 1923, this is his first team. There he is. This is the first football team in 1923, and he goes until 1936. Yeah, interesting. As you can see from the graph here, this is his tenure, 23 to 36. There's some years where he does very well. And then there's, towards the end, not so great. They didn't win a game in 1936, which isn't what you want, obviously. So maybe it's time to bring in some new people. And he was retiring, so now we need to find a replacement. And I don't know how they ended up, going all the way to Faribault, Minnesota, to look for this prospect. But they, the Wausau guys, decided to recruit or try to recruit Win Brockmeyer. I'm going to play a little clip here because it's kind of interesting to hear him say it in his own words about his experience. This is from an interview in 1980 on Rudy Tupenka's Nostalgia Hour program on WSAU. You're going to hear Win Brockmeyer talking, and he's primarily being interviewed by George Bunder, who's another radio guy that Rudy had on, sort of a three-person interview. But yeah, and Rudy, I think, chimes in here and there. But anyway, here's his experience coming to Wausau.
I came up in August.
Oh, hold on, sorry.
For an interview, and I happened to land in Wausau, my wife and I, at about 9 o'clock at night, and there was a state American Legion convention in town.
Oh, boy.
And I went to the hotel, and Bob Krusko was running the hotel at that time, and he says, there's not a room in the whole city. Well, I says, I got to find some place to sleep. So he called, was there a Northern Hotel over
there?
He called Northern, he called every place. He says, I can't find a room for you. But he says, I got one more chance. So he called up and he says, good, I finally got one for you. You'll be staying at the Island Hotel down where Billy Moy's restaurant is there now. So that's the start I got in Wausau. My impression was not very good.
Had you still had the job at Faribault at that time? When
Yes. In fact, I had most of my kids back, so that I was not too anxious to leave. So
Did you leave that summer then?
that summer,
That August? No.
yeah, when I came up here after signing a contract, I called them up and told them I didn't think I wanted to come because they pulled an act on me by not showing me the equipment, not showing me where the field was, or they took me to Rib Mountain with Bannerman's old Pontiac that couldn't quite make the hill.
A lot of cars couldn't make it in those days. Yeah.
So yeah, not maybe the best experience. In particular, I want to highlight here, they didn't show him the equipment that he'd be using, and they didn't show him the field where he'd be playing. And I think those are kind of two interesting, important notes to kind of encapsulate his early years here. Thankfully, he did end up taking the job here despite his reservations. Here he is with the team in 1937. So let's talk about them. Equipment. So he joked in this interview and elsewhere that he thought, probably the equipment that he had was probably inherited from, guys who played back in 1898. It wasn't quite that bad, but it wasn't great. This is a picture from 10 years earlier, and you can see the equipment that they're using. They got hats, they skull caps by this point. There was definitely a period in which they did not have those, but they have some pads under their jerseys, and pants, padded pants, and all that sort of stuff. So they've come a little bit, but this is early football equipment, right? And when we jump ahead another decade to 36, this is not much change. And even when we get back to this, they got some nice new jerseys over it, but it's the same pads they've been using for at least 10, 15, 20 years. So they're not the worst, but they don't fit. They're not adjustable to the players. He talked about how some of the frames weren't quite designed for the pads. Now, he had some help in getting these changes. He particularly noted Mrs. Dudley was on the school board, who loved football and wanted to promote it. I think Lauren is one of the three guys up here, I think, Lauren Dudley. So all of her sons played, and so that was sort of an ally on the school board. And then he ultimately pitched these not as, football equipment, but he wanted safety pads. And that was the way that he got it through the administration to get the money to replace the pads, which he did. Now, the other thing here, of course, is and this is a little harder to fix, is the field that they played on. They didn't really have a field. This is a game from 1916, as you can see, and it's labeled here on the bottom, Yawkey Field, which is the baseball diamond. It's what we call Athletic Park today. So you can see that here. Here's another picture of it, again from 1926. So you have the stands, and that helps in the area. But this is, and I should say, I've seen pictures of them playing here up until like 1945, 46. So they did occasionally play here. But it's not going to be the best location long term. it's not a great practice location. So more often than not, what they would play and often, practice was on the grounds of the Wausau High School facilities. This is before all the extensions. This is actually, I think at this point, they still have the original 1898 building that they're teaching out of. But there's another building, and so they have sort of big areas. And so this is the, I don't remember if he identified the two fields that they practiced and played on as the old field and the depression field. And I'm not sure which one this is. This is where they played some games, I think in the mid 40s here. And you can see that, people are coming out in big numbers. You got a little bit of some stands. Here's a picture of the team in 31. You can see how close the stands get on this side, from the building. It's right up against the building, right? Oop. So they did have this. And he said that this held about 4,300 people, but it was standing room only. And that's not great. This becomes a really popular thing. This is before, football and baseball and basketball and all that stuff is broadcast at a professional level on television. So if you're local and you want to go see something on the weekend, you go watch the high school football game. And everybody came out and they cheered, and it was really a community event. But you couldn't fit too much of the community. And what you did, like if you're standing room and you're watching a full football game, it's not the best viewing experience. So it'd be nice to have some change. But like I said, people, and I'm just going to jump ahead here to the formation of the drugstore coaches, which is kind of a pejorative term that's used in various places for, it's kind of like, armchair quarterbacks or Monday morning quarterback. You kind of sit back and say, they should have done this. It was a thing where because the community was coming out to these games, they would on Mondays go over to the the drugstore, and they would pick apart the game with the coaches and their decisions and all of that. But they actually formed a group here. And I'm going to let Win Brockmeyer from this 1980 interview explain here.
One thing that the drugstore coaches that were organized by Herb Genrick and
Hold on. Sorry, I'm going to turn the volume up.
Dr. Merritt Jones and some of that group that used to meet at his drugstore after the game and hash out what they should have done and what they shouldn't have done, and why they didn't punt on fourth down and so forth.
Yeah.
So they finally got them out in the open. The Board of Education, I think, helped on that. That was Frosty Smith and that gang got sick and tired of listening to all that guff. So they organized, and they were really a productive group, because the eventual production of their activity was Tom Field.
Oh, yes.
They're really responsible for the development of Tom Field, headed by Walt Tom and his committee that went out and raised the money to build this beautiful stadium.
Right. Well, I remember that.
I think I'm just going to cut it off there. They go on to talk about how this is the group, because they were able to harness all of this, they were able to, these people, eventually they get kind of taken over and replaced by the student groups, the parent groups. But for their time, especially in the 40s and 50s, not only did they help raise money to replace, the field, right, building of Tom Field, like you see, excuse me, here in 1950, probably the winter of 50-51. But they also had, cameras. Like they talk about Ben Keebler had they called him a bug for camera at that point. So he had a film camera, and he would take film of the game. And then on Mondays, they'd get down in the basement of the WPS building, and everybody would crowd around and watch the game and pick it apart and, figure out what to do next. And so this was a very helpful harnessing of the community in an interesting way that you don't really see today. But like I said, here's Tom Field in 1950-51. It's finished in 1951, and you can see this from a little bit later here. And this becomes the home for football as well as track and field and other sports stuff that eventually gets added onto. It's kind of interesting to see, especially this picture, the sparsity of the hill. And I think part of that is the tree cover gets developed a bit more. I try to find a similar picture today, and it's just kind of trees, which understandable. Maybe you want to soak up some of that sound from the games. But anyway, this is something that they couldn't have done. Not only could it hold more spectators, but things like the lights. Like that's not these big electric lights and scoreboards and all that sort of stuff. That's not something that you could effectively do on the side of the high school grounds. So with that in mind, they go on to play some football. And throughout all of this, right? I want to take a moment to talk about the leagues that they were part of, or the conference that they were in. So the first conference that Wausau High School joins in terms of the football was the Wisconsin River Valley Conference. And they dropped the river somewhere in here. Now, this may have existed in some form before this point, but I found that first involving football in 1920. I'm pretty sure it was like a basketball or baseball before that, but football seems to emerge around 1920. So this league consisted, and here's the teams that were playing in 1920: Antigo, Merrill, Marshfield, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, and Wausau. And then they were looking at getting Chippewa Falls, Oshkosh, and possibly Waupaca involved. And over the years, that changed a little bit here and there. But that's the main group, at least in 1920. Now, this is the team that the place that they dominated for so long. I mean, there were some other teams, like Anago gave them trouble early on. Merrill always had a good team. There's some other teams that gave them trouble, but they won so frequently that in 1954, Anago, Marshfield, Merrill, and Rhinelander decide they've had enough. And this is not like speculation or reading between the lines. They explicitly say, we're sick of losing to Wausau. What's the point of putting all this effort into building up a team if we just, we don't have the population, we don't have the coaching staff and all this sort of stuff. We want to play in a league that we can actually have a chance at winning once in a while. And so the Wisconsin Valley Conference breaks up. They spend 1955 as a freelance, so they didn't play in a league necessarily. They just played a bunch of games. And then in 1956, they joined the Big River Conference, along with Stevens Point and Wisconsin Rapids, I think, also followed them into this conference. So that in 1956, they were playing against Marinette, Sheboygan, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, La Crosse, and Eau Claire. There's also Menominee, which is actually Michigan. So this is not just a Wisconsin league or conference. This is also in there. They also played against St. Louis Park in Minnesota. So these are the big cities. And then there's other teams like Oshkosh and Madison, La Crosse. Yeah, so a bunch of different bigger cities in Wisconsin that they play against. And again, Wausau High School under Brockmeyer does very well throughout this period. Again, winning more than they lose by a good long margin. If they didn't get first, they often got second or maybe third at most in the conference. But eventually, you have the creation of a new Wisconsin Valley Conference in 1973, or after 1972, we leave the Big River Conference for that. Now, at this point, Brockmeyer is no longer coaching. He retires in the school year of 1971. So the last game that he plays was the East-West game. 1970 was the first year that the Wausau High School was split into East and West. And so he beat Wausau West's team in the fall of 1970. And then he spent a few years as the athletic director for the school district. And then he joined in 1973 the Wisconsin Valley Conference as a commissioner, which he did until his death in 1980. Yeah. So this is some footage here from Chalk Talk, I think they called it, 1965. I'm just going to have in the background here. I just wanted to share. So, what was he like as a coach? Certainly he knew football in and out. He knew how to make it work and how to adjust. In 1966, after their 200th win as coach, he said that his philosophy was to condition first and then the basic fundamentals of blocking and tackling. In regard to that, there are stories about guys who would come back from, basic training for World War II or Korea, and they said, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was worse when I was in football with Brockmeyer. So that gives you kind of an idea of the regimen that he was putting these kids through. And then he also said that in his estimation, a winning tradition was really important. Once you got a winning tradition, kids will want to fight for it, and be more likely. The players will really want to keep that tradition. So he said that it was worth, in his estimation, 6 points on the field if you had a winning tradition, and he certainly did over the years. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff you could talk about. He understood the game very well in a level that I'm not really comfortable explaining as somebody who doesn't know football in and out like that. But he certainly had an ability to inspire, as well as just, again, an understanding of the game to the point where, and also just to scout, he had this instinctual ability to go, to watch a game and go, well, their star quarterback can't throw out of the pocket, and then immediately be able to, adapt the plan of the team to do that. One of the other things that they did, certainly for the long-term success of this, which is something that many schools weren't doing, is he partnered with the middle school and brought those kids as part of it, and actually brought up a feeding program to make sure that he had a good supply of talented kids who knew what they were doing. And this all paid out, of course, over the course of his career. And, you can see that here from 1937 to 1970, there's the statistics. He won more often than he lost, and very frequently they won the conference. So just to talk about his legacy here, in addition to the wins and all of that sort of stuff, he also was notable for coaching 3 Hall of Famers. Bruce Smith wasn't a Wisconsinite; he was from Minnesota back when he was, I think, Faribault is where or maybe Fergus, one of the two, when Brockmeyer was teaching there. And then Jim Otto from Wausau. He was during that 1955 freelance year. He was here, and he went on to play for the Raiders as Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, in that same interview that I played some clips from, they talk about how Brockmeyer was going to go and for the inauguration of the Hall of Fame game to Jim Otto, but I don't think he was able to make it. I think he died before he could make that. But he was there, of course, for Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, maybe one of the more well-known people. If you're from that generation, you know who he is. He was there in the early 1940s in Wausau, ended up going out and playing some college ball for Michigan, I think. World War II, he played in the Army team, I think. Well, was in the military for a little bit. And then he went off and became a star of the Los Angeles Rams in the NFL. Over the course of this career, though, he kind of left it before he was, at the end. He decided to retire earlier than you would expect, in part because he had some injuries, but also, he had a promising career as an actor, believe it or not. He's sort of the prototypical, he was doing commercials and sponsorships and stuff. And he ended up having a little bit of a movie career. And in fact, the first film that he starred in 1953 was a story of his life, a biopic, whatever, called Crazy Legs. And this film actually premiered here in Wausau in 1953. And it starred Crazy Legs Hirsch as himself. They recast his romantic interest. They used his actual wife, Joan Vors, played that instead. And of course, for his mentor, because they had a very strong friendship even after he left, it was Lloyd Nolan playing Win Brockmeyer. Now, Lloyd Nolan might not be a name that you recognize. If you've watched movies from the 40s and 50s, the television and movies, he was a character actor that he worked quite a bit, so you might recognize the face. But he brought in to play Win Brockmeyer. And I just wanted to end with a little clip here from that movie. This is an early scene in which they introduce Win Brockmeyer, as played by Lloyd Nolan.
Quite a... How's it look for you this year, Coach?
They're pretty green yet, Professor. They've never been in a game. I'll know better after we play Rhinelander next week.
Now, you got a spoiler out here, Brock. That's so we expect the championship team every year. Tell me, why does a man with your record go year after year coaching at a little high school?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I like it. Everybody wants something different. This is what I want.
And they introduce Crazy Legs Hirsch with that scene. But I'm just going to cut it there. Just as an interesting note about the portrayal here, he was asked, when Brockmeyer was asked about Mr. Nolan's portrayal, and, it was okay. I don't know, this scene is kind of interesting. I don't know who the professor's supposed to be. Teacher, I guess. And his accent is a little odd. Every time I watch this and I hear the word, how he pronounced Rhinelander, It just kind of like, oh, okay. But for the most part, is a pretty good portrayal. But Win liked to kind of joke, I think half jokingly and partially seriously, that this might have kind of ruined his reputation in the sense that Nolan was always lighting up a cigarette between, in every other scene, whereas Win Brockmeyer never smoked. So that was something that he was a little annoyed by. But other than that, it was a decent portrayal. And certainly something that, how many people from Wausau, Wisconsin can claim to have a Hollywood film represent them in this way. So that's kind of cool. So that's Coach Win Brockmeyer. A winning tradition, and certainly someone that you should know. If you've, next time that you're driving around on the west side and you see Brockmeyer Park, well, it's named after him. And certainly he's got a legacy on a lot of different levels of from his career as an educator, as a mentor to generations of kids, and obviously as a football coach. So, yeah. Just to kind of bring us, that concludes the first of our month-long series on people you should know, which brings us next week to I.S. Horgan. So that'll be Gary Gisselman will be back to tell you about the architect of the park system here in Marathon County, first director of the parks department, both in Wausau and at the county level. So I.S. Horgan. And I think that's probably good. I said if anybody has any questions, I'm going to check here. Feel free to do that, to drop those in the comment section. But otherwise, thanks for watching. I appreciate people are interested enough to keep coming back. Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. I know Scott was talking about the aerial of the football field. Yeah, I was looking to see if I could find that, and I just decided to move on. But I know that there are some interesting aerial pictures where they show the fields kind of crammed in there. But it was all in the same block for sure. The Wausau High School. It did its purpose early on, but I think as they you built a team and it became sort of a thing that everybody wanted to come out and see the win of the team. You got to have a little bit more of a venue to host it. So that's what they did. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. And again, we'll see you next week for some more on I.S. Horgan and the rest of the month. And we'll see you next time.